podcast. Subbing for Sam this morning. And welcome to Anna, who's subbing for Nick. So lots of newish faces, although some of them are quite familiar to me from other places. And Alice, I think you were here last time, weren't you? Yeah. I'm just wondering whether to read out the quorum for this committee stuff. I think, do we need to read that now? No, I shouldn't think so. So let's have apologies. I've sort of half covered apologies in that we've got Laura covering for Sam Wakeford and Anna covering for Nick. Is there anybody else I need to mention? Jo, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, yes, just to follow up on that. So we've had formal apologies from the Mayor and from Councillor Wakeford, and technically from Councillor Pettit, who, although joining us remotely,
is unable to vote.
Is unable to vote. Yes,
that's fine. We have received one public question from Mr. Carpen, who is not present. Does that mean that we will respond to him? Oh, you'll read it. Okay, fine. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the question that we have had from received from Anthony Carpen, resident, is what conversations has the CPCA had with large sci-tech developers and landowners regarding establishing lifelong learning facilities on their sites? Most recently, I raised this with the Cambridge Biomedical Campus at one of their public meetings in 2024, following the changes to their 2050 strategy. I find it astonishing that there is no community or lifelong learning facility open and accessible to adults looking to switch careers into sectors where Cambridge Science Park and CBC firms regularly complain about skills shortages.
Do you have?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. So thank you, Mr. Carpen, for the question. As the committee knows, we undertake a continuous review of further education and skills cold spots across the region, and our most recent work in that space obviously identified that St Neots and East Cambs were areas in the region where we knew that there was not sufficient access to provision for wider skills development, and so what we would say is that we will continually keep that under review. I think once we've issued this capital funding, I think one of the next jobs for the committee will be to agree on the next cycle of reviewing where we have cold spots in provision, and that process will take into consideration all large developments that have happened fairly recently to enable us to make some decisions over whether further investment is needed in additional spaces across the region.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that answer will be printed somewhere. Okay, the next, I've missed two bits. The first of which was declarations of interest. Katie.
So I guess I have two interests to declare. Firstly, as Chair, you may be aware, and Andrew is aware, I've recently joined Chambers of Commerce as a non-exec director. So I guess that might bear a relation when we're talking about anything else it related. And then I also have an interest to declare around the FE Cold Spots Fund. So I'm a director of a social enterprise called Citizen Hub in St Neots. Whilst we're not a direct applicant, there is an application that has been submitted that covers the space. So I'm really happy to step out or be guided by the committee with what you'd like me to do when we get to that point.
Very much. That's great. Charlotte, if this is about the chambers, I'm not sure whether you need to declare an interest on that, but we can note that you're members of the Chambers of Commerce. But I think actually you're here as members of the business board, aren't you? So it's not quite the same. But anyway, it's noted. But I think I don't think there's any kind of pecuniary interest in that, so that's fine. Thank you very much. Then we move on to the minutes. Is the committee happy to approve the minutes from the 21st of October as an accurate record and to note the action log? And are there any comments on the minutes or the action log? I don't see any hands, so we will approve those as a correct record, and then skip over public questions, which I've done in the wrong order. Move on to the Combined Authority forward plan, which is for noting. Are there any questions or comments on the forward plan from anybody? Brilliant. Thank you very much. We will note that. And then we come to the Director's Highlight Report, which I think is probably one of the meatiest items for the morning. Thank you, Andrea.
You. So good morning, everybody. I think we have some slides that I'd like to share with you all on this particular item, and these will be shared as well with members if they haven't already. Just while we wait for that slide to come up, what I'm hoping to provide you all with today is a summary of some of the key national policy changes that are happening, that are having an influence on us locally, and also some of our local priorities in terms of where the skills team and the wider economic growth and development team are spending some of their energies. I'll also update you on some work of the Skills Board, of which some of us are members, and also talk a little bit about the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer, which I will provide you with much more detail on at our next committee in February. So this slide just covers off some of the key things that are happening at a national level for everybody to be aware of. So since the new government came into power, there has been a lot of movement in terms of the education and skills policy arena. One of the main ones being the establishment of Skills England, which is a single body that will have oversight of skills provision. So this is post-16 skills and also higher education, which is developing, and the combined authority is working as a strategic partner with the Department for Education to develop Skills England and what it will be focused on. So that's a key thing to note. The other key thing to note is the fact that there is a post-16 curriculum review happening, a review of statutory work experience guidance, which the DfE are hoping to publish next year. And there is also a review being led by the DfE on employer investment in skills. And this is linked to a change that the DfE are hoping to make around the apprenticeship levy, where they're proposing to make changes to that levy. So it is called a growth and skills levy, and employers will have some freedoms and flexibilities to use that levy on training in that is additional and separate to apprenticeship provision. We're really pleased to say that the Combined Authority is one of two nationally that are working with the DfE to hold some employer engagement sessions. And we will be hosting an employer engagement session. We'll be contacting key people this week. My colleague Alexis McLeod is leading that piece of work, and we will be holding a round table with DfE colleagues, with employers across the region to talk about investment in skills. So that's a really positive involvement that we have there. Another key thing to note is that there was a publication in the English Devolution Bill that came through just before Christmas, and in reference to skills, it spoke about consolidation of some of our funding streams, and for the Combined Authority to work more closely with the employer representative body on the local skills improvement plan, which for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce, of which Charlotte is the chief exec. And I think that we were pleased to see that. I think in many cases we were sort of doing that already, which is a really positive thing. So to have that confirmed and written into the devolution bill was well received. So in terms of local priorities, a key one to note is the establishment of a local growth plan. So this is something that all regions and nations have been asked to produce. The local growth plan will be a 10-year plan, which will actually help inform the national industrial strategy that the government are leading. And that's where it will help the government nationally and locally to channel investment into the right areas of planned and projected growth. And obviously skills and employment are going to form a major part of that growth plan. And I will talk to you a little bit more about what we're doing to shape that up in the next slide. The other key areas for us is the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer. So again, just before Christmas, the government released its Get Britain Working white paper. And in that white paper, it speaks about youth guarantees, and it talks about Connect to Work, two key programmes and policy initiatives that the government see as making a significant contribution to tackling rising numbers of economic inactivity across the region. The youth guarantee is something that the government want to roll out nationally, but they've chosen 8 regions across the country to be trailblazer areas. And I'm pleased to say that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is one of those trailblazer areas. So this is particularly focused on 18 to 21-year-olds, tackling NEET and making sure those young people have got the right support they need to get themselves into employment or further learning. And again, we've got an item further on in the agenda which addresses that, and I've got some more information to share with you in a minute. The other key programme is Connect to Work, which the committee have heard about on a number of occasions in the last year. This was previously called Universal Support, some of you may remember. And this is specifically a supported employment programme, again targeted at economically inactive adults, specifically with health conditions. So this programme is going to take a real systems effort to address the key challenges that these individuals have when it comes to their health conditions, preventing them from accessing work, and how the system can work together to enable them to access good work. So that's another key area of focus for us. And then moving forward, it really is kind of business as usual to talk to our constituent colleagues around developments and planning and key kind of infrastructure projects that are happening across the region where skills and employment play a major part. And we've had some really good conversations with colleagues at Greater Cambridgeshire about their plan and how we can be involved in shaping the Section 106 agreements linked to skills and employment there. And obviously, we're continuing our work with RFE Cold Spots. And I'm pleased to share that officers are meeting this week to start talking about travel to learn and earn, and how we might, as a combined authority, look at linking and knitting together our existing transport policies around having much more of a focus on the journeys that people make to get to learning and to get to work, and what we can do to really support that further. So that's a kind of real kind of key summary of some of the key priorities we're focused on, and there's some business as usual programs at the bottom that we're working on a daily basis. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this slide just gives you a summary of a new working group that we've established that's part of this committee and also the Skills and Employment Board. So the board meets and acts as an advisory board to shape a lot of the content that comes up to this committee. And we've agreed a little while ago that we would establish a Skills for Growth working group that would help to focus a lot of the development of the skills element to the local growth plan that I've mentioned previously, and also to respond to some of the key priorities that have still that are still challenging the region and that are still emerging through the local skills improvement plan that the Chamber have led. And we see this as a really good opportunity as well to start shaping out some of the conversations that we may need for the second edition of the local skills improvement plan, which we're waiting for the DfE to issue guidance on at this moment in time. So the work of the Skills for Growth group, the objectives are shared there, and members of the group are listed there. They're members from this group, and they're also members from the board. If any other members of this group would like to join that group, then please let us know. Charlotte is kindly chairing the Skills for Growth group as well as the Skills Board. And we've had one very productive meeting so far, but we've committed to meeting monthly to move a programme of work forward, and we'll have more detail to share with you at the next committee, as well as some of the outputs from our discussions. Can you move to the next slide, please? This is some of the key priorities that we're focused on at the moment, and this really does come from the local skills improvement plan. So we've got a focus on Fenland and the labour market. Exclusion and poor outcomes for young people in Fenland is a key focus for us. We're also looking at demand, so the increase in demand in green skills, and to enable a very responsive skills sector. We've also seen shortages in certain workforces, especially in the care industry. So we're hoping to understand more about that so we can put something in place to help encourage and incentivise more skills development within those sectors. And we're also looking at the impact on employers of rising numbers of inactive adults due to long-term sickness, and also the impact on the future digital skills demand, again, so that we can start to form a plan that will address some of these challenges moving forward. And there you'll also see some decline where we've seen job decline in certain sectors. We've seen a decline in employer investment in skills, which is obviously linked to the conversation we had earlier and the point of why we're working closely with DFE to look at that, and the decline in employment relevant to education and training. So there has been a decline regionally in the number of people who are working in the education and training sector, and we want to deep dive that and really understand what that means. Is that a problem? We're kind of doing the so what factor on a lot of these things, again, so we can address these proactively. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to move on to the youth guarantee, and I know that text is very small. My super contact lenses are struggling to see that myself. But the youth guarantee, so the vision there of the DFE, and obviously it's shared by us, is that all young people aged 18 to 21 have access to the training and employment support that they need to prevent them from becoming economically inactive. This comes from a space where nationally 21.9% of the working age population are economically inactive. So this is a real challenge nationally, and we know across our region that Peterborough and Fenland are really struggling with this, and that there are neighbourhoods across Cambridgeshire where this is a significant issue. So the youth guarantee really aims to bring together a lot of existing services so that there is a consistent systems wide approach that's applied to supporting these young people. Nationally, there's no single accountable body for this age group. This age group do not come under the statutory remit of the county council to support them, and they'll only be supported from Job Centre Plus, for example, if they're claiming benefits. So I think the government are looking to combine strategic authorities to take that leadership role and to work across the system to make sure that those young people have got the support that they need. If you can move to the next slide, please. So this lists a number of the Trailblazer objectives, which is the theme of the Trailblazer is very much kind of test and learn, identify a lot of the gaps, and really feed back and evaluate and monitor the impact of any particular initiatives that we lead through the Trailblazer work. But this again is looking at taking some local accountability, making sure we've got the right systems in place to use data to track and monitor and support these young people, and to make sure that we've got the right provision and the right type of support in place to support them. And a key part of that is making sure that the young person's voice is at the centre of this work, which is why we've brought the item today that Eva will lead on in terms of the proposal of a youth forum. It's something that the Department for Education are also championing as well. So really pleased to say that we've made some good initial progress with that. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide. This just gives you an indicative timeline. This is shared with us from the Department for Education. So they published the guidance last Thursday, and we have until the 14th of February to turn around our kind of investment plan and get that back in. So it's a reasonably high level investment plan, and the DFE know that it's going to be an iterative process, that we've got lots of work to do to establish the right governance structures and the right forums to have conversations if we're going to move this work forward. I will be taking a paper to public sector leaders meeting on the 7th of February to ensure that public sector leaders are briefed on all of this as well, and we'll be working with my colleagues to make sure that we can get everybody on the right page really in terms of getting this launched and getting started, because DfE are expecting that we would get started in the new financial year. So that's the end of my briefing. There's a lot to unpack in there. I'm happy to take any questions, but I will bring more information, especially on the Youth Guarantee, to the next committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. There is indeed an absolutely vast amount in there, and it's actually really exciting to see all this work going on. So thank you for that. And the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer project is a brilliant one. Questions for Andrea? Eileen.
I don't know if this is for now, for when we get to the subject on the agenda. It's about the Youth Guarantee, and I'm just worried about people who have sort of dropped out, perhaps because of COVID lockdowns when they're at school, who are perhaps still under the radar, who aren't claiming benefits, who perhaps have health problems, mental health problems, and who aren't on anyone's radar. How is there any work that can be done with like health authorities to try and pick up on those people? Because they I'm aware of some examples where they're just sitting at home all day not doing anything, and this could go on for a very long time, and it's not good for the economy to have these people, and it's not good for them either.
Thank you. The group you've described are a priority for the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer. It is finding those unknown young people that are not accessing services, that desperately need the support actually. And there are ways of doing that. There are methods of doing it, but it does take a systems approach. And I think, as you've said, working with health, working with other statutory and non-statutory services, working with the community and voluntary sector as well, and just making sure that we really focus on raising awareness, and doing all we can to try and reach those young people, and using young people's networks as well is another key way of trying to engage with those young people. But COVID does present us with an additional challenge that perhaps we haven't experienced before, because that is the generation that went through COVID. And we do know that we've got significant rising numbers of young people with mental health conditions, and have seen, you know, the impact mentally and physically of going through COVID. So working closely with the health services is going to be absolutely critical to the success of this project, and making sure we recognise those groups from the start so that we can prioritise the work we do around those.
Other questions? Laura.
You mentioned some of the areas that the board is going to be focusing on, and I didn't see agritech named there. We have a lot of very innovative farmers across our region who want to share their skills. Will the board be looking in that area as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So agritech still features as one of the strategic sectors across the region. So advanced manufacturing, life sciences, agritech, digital and IT. But what we know and what we're finding through some of the barriers we're trying to work with as part of the newly formed group is, what are those barriers that are stopping our skills system working efficiently, such as long-term inactivity, the shortage of teachers, the shortage of care workers. So whilst we know what we're aiming for, we also know that we've got to make sure that the whole system works efficiently. And actually, if we can support people from perhaps who are not employed in education or training to gain either digital, green, or the skills that will enable them to join one of those strategic sectors, for us, I personally think that feels like we're kind of getting a triple word score in Scrabble. You know, we're achieving a lot.
Explanation. Any further questions, Anna?
Got it. Well, really, it's more of a comment to say thank you for the amazing work that's happening here. It's fabulous to see. I wanted to pick up specifically on the way in which we're looking to work cross committee on these issues. I think the work that's happening with the business board sounds fantastic. I'm also really pleased to see that focus on infrastructure, with my hat on as chair of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. I'm really aware that quite a lot of the work that we are doing is trying to facilitate getting to education and training and, of course, employment for so many people in our region. So I'm really pleased to see that reflected here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Oh, Laura, come on.
You mentioned national issues that are affecting your work, but one thing that you didn't include was the devolution white paper. I'm wondering if you're seeing anything on the horizon that's coming your direction that we might be prepared for.
So the devolution white paper in relation to skills was a little underwhelming, I have to say. Obviously, I mentioned the LSEP and the greater and strengthened role that we'll play along in partnership with the ERB, and the proposal to consolidate funding, which is very welcomed because at the moment our main devolution grant of adult skills comes to us. Then we get 2 other pots of funding that come in a separate pot, which makes life challenging when it comes to commissioning. So we've really welcomed the proposal of that consolidation of funding, but it didn't contain a lot of the other things that we've been lobbying for. So we will continue on that journey. And we will continue having those discussions with Skills England and senior officials at the DfE and the Skills Minister, to make sure that we do try and achieve greater devolution in a skills landscape for the greater good of the residents that live here. But yeah, that's where I sit with that one.
Thank you. There was a huge amount in there, so thank you very, very much for the briefing. And I think it is really helpful to have that session at the beginning where we can kind of see an overview of what the team have been doing, which is brilliant. We don't need to vote on that. It was for noting only. So we will note it and move on to item 7, which is the CPCA's wider outcome framework, which I think Jackie is going to introduce. It's very nice to see you, Jackie.
Morning, members of the, sorry, yeah. So morning, everyone, and members of the committee and colleagues. So the report today is to update the committee members on progress with the wider outcomes framework. Members are asked to note the update on CPCA's wider outcomes framework phases 2 and 3, which Mark will talk about in a few moments, and I'll introduce him in a few seconds. Mark is on the screen, waiting to talk to you all. It's designed to more effectively evidence the impact of learning through beyond training completions and achieving qualifications. And there's a full report as Appendix 2 attached to the papers for your ease. So you'll remember that Dr. Helen Plant, one of the consultants who was working on the project, has provided information on phase 1 of the report at the Skills and Education Committee in June last year. And this is to update on progress. CPCA commissioned Dr. Plant and Mark Ravenhall to support the development of the framework. And by way of introduction, I'd like to just give you a bit of background on Helen and Mark. So Helen has extensive experience in policy-focused research, development and evaluation in the post-16 education and skills sector. She led the development of a wider outcomes planning and capture tool for community learning for the National Institute of Adult Continuing Education. If everybody's been in the sector as long as me, that's NIACE, and that subsequently became the Learning and Work Institute, which has done a lot of research in this area. Helen has subsequently worked with the Learning and Work Institute on a range of projects to develop and implement models for evidencing the impacts of adult learning. Mark is a highly experienced freelance educational researcher, and he's also worked in this space extensively. He's previously the Director for Policy and Impact at NIACE, as well as working with the Education and Training Foundation and FE Education Trust for leadership. I'm very pleased that Mark is here with us today to provide the update on the report. So I'll hand over to him for a reminder of why this work is important, to update members on the outcomes of phase 2, which was the development of the framework, and to outline progress with phase 3, which is the implementation stage. And then very happy to take questions after Mark's update.
Thanks, Jackie. Over to you, Mark.
Countries of the UK, including the devolved nations, to look at how what the impact of adult learning was and how it was measured. And in terms of our approach today, so we've got slides on the background, the work to date, the wider outcomes framework structure, which is obviously an appendix to the report, and what we're currently working on and our next steps. So that's what I'll walk you through very briefly this morning. So the next slide gives a little bit of the background. So our basic thesis is not something we've just made up. It comes from the UNESCO Institute of Lifelong Learning, and it's a third global report on adult learning and education. And the definition of adult learning in this context is everything, basically. Informal learning, formal learning, what we call non-formal learning as well. Everything, including vocational education, medical training, the lot. So this is a wholly inclusive definition of adult learning and education, right up to higher education, doctorates, and so forth. So adult learning is a very broad definition here. And what a vast amount of research showed was that adult learning led to a range of benefits in 3 domains, largely: health and well-being, social, civic and community life, employment and the labour market. And the critical thing here is that they are cross-cutting or overlapping outcomes. They're overlapping, so that if one undertakes a course, one sees benefits in all 3 domains, or one is very likely to see benefits in 3 domains, whether or not the focus of the learning was on one particular domain, like vocational. So this theory, which is backed up by lots and lots of research, is critical to our understanding of some of the things I think Andrea's touched on very well already around, say, economic inactivity. So the research I've done with Learning and Work Institute in combined authorities in the northeast of England, 2 combined authorities, showed that those facing experiencing economic inactivity faced a range of challenges at the same time. And some of those were skills-based, some of those were health-based, some of them were around social isolation and loneliness, So there's a range of factors that needed to be addressed through learning there, and that's how they plan to address quite significant levels of economic activity in those areas. So learning actually is a bit of a magic bullet for addressing a number of things at the same time. When one looks hard at learning in this way, one begins to think about the commissioning implications for combined authorities and others, about the type of adult learning it commissions in future, and how one gets the best value for public money. So I was always struck by a quote from the time of the last Labour government, which invested in a 7-year programme looking at the wider benefits of learning through the Institute of Education in London. So this is 7 years of research using big data that concluded that the impact of education depends not only on the quantity of education experienced, and the qualifications gained, but also on the quality and nature of the education experience, its appropriateness to the learner, and the effect it has on their life. So what researchers were saying there is, when one commissions learning, let's not just take the easy route about thinking about qualifications and whether they are a proxy for a certain number of outcomes, but let's think about the nature of the education experience and how can we commission learning that is most effective. And that might include spending less money to having more effect. So it could be a more efficient way of doing it. So this is essentially, this research is at the heart of the issue around how we commission learning in the future. So the next slide, please. So the work to date was looking at the international research on the wider outcomes. We set up a national reference group of combined authorities, the Greater London authorities and other national specialists working in the field. We also undertook interviews with some of them, including the Department for Education. We worked with adult learning providers in your area on a number of aspects, including data collection and analysis. And I must say, the way the combined authority and the providers have collaborated on this has been exemplary, really. I mean, the way you've brought everyone along on this process has been really, really good, because some of this is quite challenging discussions, or involves quite challenging discussions. And I think we resulted in a process, and see what Jackie and Andrea feel about this, but I feel we've co-designed a wider outcomes framework with your providers in the area. We've also run learner focus groups in 2 areas to talk to learners about the type of questions we would ask them to find out about their experience of learning and the effect it's had on them. And from all that, we worked with providers to have agreed approaches to data collection and reporting, with a combination of locally collected data sets and the national individualized learner record, or the ILR, that is administered centrally. And the ILR is very useful because it collects data across the whole of England for learners that we can use to analyse and possibly even benchmark ourselves against. So next slide, please. So all this led to a framework on wider outcomes. The framework, which is obviously attached to the report documents, takes us through the background, the introduction, how we arrived at these ideas and this structure, a reminder of what the Combined Authority is trying to achieve through the Adult Skills Fund and parts of it, what the model should look like, and we went for a logic chain approach in this regard, which is the most common method for designing impact frameworks, and the evidence sources we should use, and then how we would loosely triangulate data that comes from national data sets, how we would supplement that locally, how we would analyze that and report on it, and then finally what the time scales are. So essentially our framework would focus on 3 domains: health, work, and communities, which is the shorthand for the UNESCO domains, impact domains, but also we would collect information on the wider outcomes that are more generic around things like confidence and motivation to undertake further learning, which would apply in all 3 domains. So finally, the final slide just takes us through the next steps. So we're at the phase now of testing and developing the framework, which has been accepted by providers. We're working with the providers, again, very closely and in collaboration with them on how we develop the framework in the context of the changing policy context that Andrea's outlined. And that is particularly involved at this stage on how we develop the learner survey. So you'll see from the wider outcomes framework, one of the pieces of work we do is take national data sets from the individualized learner record and cross-reference it to the 3 domains we're using. Now, within those 3 domains, health, work, and communities, we have developed with learners some questions we're asking them consistently across the area. So there are a number of questions where we directly ask learners about the effect learning has had on their health or their involvement in community work, their ability to help their children with their homework, their ability to apply for jobs, or their motivation to get involved in the labour market or to volunteer, and so forth. So there's quite a lot of questions we've got for learners that we're in the process of honing down. We tested about 60 questions, 60 questions that were from surveys used right across Europe. So we collected those 60 questions in 4 areas: general outcomes, health, work, and communities, and we tested those with learners to see which were the most relevant to their lives in this context. We have developed those questions further and shared them with providers. Now, the big debate there was whether one develops a regional learner survey that is administered centrally, or one asks providers to ask those questions of their learners in a common format so that they're comparable. Now, as you will know, and as Helen will have told you about last time, the GLA went down the route of a centrally administered survey, asking through a market research company, asking every learner on Adult Skills Fund provision in London to undertake a survey at certain times in the year. Now, London operates in the context of, at the time of delegation, having an Adult Skills Fund in the region of 400 million. therefore, in the words of some of their officers, they've put all their eggs in one basket. They're sort of like top slicing an element from the Adult Skills Fund and using that to develop a very significant learner survey. Now, that is quite a useful approach, but very expensive. But maybe quite in that scale, it's probably not that expensive in terms of unit cost. And I'm doing a strategic review for one of the London colleges at the moment, where we're comparing their ILR data against data from the London Learner Survey that the GLA have been able to give them for that college. So you're able to loosely triangulate stuff that's coming from within the college and stuff that's coming from the London Learner Survey, which is collected centrally. So you're able to benchmark yourself against certain things. So do our learners have more confidence because of the learning they've had at our college than it is the average across London, for example? So what sort of things do we need to work on? What sort of things are we really good at? So that approach, a sort of area-wide survey, is not something we're advising taking forward in CPCA area. All your providers do very good surveys already. It's just asking them to add a few more questions to those surveys in a certain way for us to gain additional data from the providers. And that is the critical stage we're at the moment. We are developing those questions in partnership with providers, and we're developing, and when I say we, CPCA are developing data collection analysis tools with the expertise you've got in-house, liaising with the providers. So there's some significant work going on that Jackie is leading, where we're meeting with data people, insights people, and we're meeting with providers about the data they're collecting to make sure we've got really robust approaches. So that's the work that's ongoing at the moment. Once we have those data, we will start analyzing it and seeing what messages it tells us. So what we would like to do, and what was in the original plan, is to take these conversations further with a wider group of providers. Currently, we're focusing on tailored learning colleagues at a senior level, but we would like to extend that, if possible, to a wider group of providers. So that's an update for you. You've got the documents attached to the committee paper. Really happy to answer any questions if I've not covered them sufficiently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was very thorough, and it's really interesting to hear about the progress of this work. So thank you very much. Questions from members? Anna.
Yeah, and thanks very much for this. This is really interesting. And apologies, I may have missed some of this in the papers, so I apologise in advance if this is in there. So I had one question and one reflection. But looking at the engagement consultation here with the learners, I wonder if we're consulting at the start and end, so we have comparative data that we can use, or whether we're just going at the end and saying, do you feel more confident or less depressed, or whatever we're looking at. So I'm looking here particularly at page 49 of my pack. So that was one question. And the other question is, I just wonder if we're doing any work around some of these more or less statements, because they can sometimes give a slightly misleading response. So if somebody isn't feeling anxious before they go into a piece of training, they're not going to say they're less anxious at the end of it. And that might look as if that training therefore is not effective, but actually that hasn't been a need that learner needs meeting. So I wonder therefore whether something that's more at the beginning, tell us what you feel about these things, at the end, tell us what you feel might be better for comparison. And also I think there's something around in this, looking, say, at the work benefit statements, I have more interest in getting a better job. Well, actually, for some of those people that we're working with, the training might not be about getting a better job. It might be about staying in the job you're in and doing that more effectively and having support in coping with that work environment. So I just wonder if when we're focusing on seeking new employment or getting better jobs, that's a really important aspect for many of our learners, but it may not be an important aspect for all of them. So I think some of those we just need to keep an eye on. And I also wonder, just when we're looking at that kind of broad framework that we've got for assessing the impact and the value of the different training that we're looking to fund, I wonder if there almost needs to be one more box at the beginning, which is in effect, what's the outcome we want? So we're starting with that input of what's the money, and the money's really important, but actually, should we start one step back with, sorry, this is very much the teacher in me, but looking at the learning outcome. So then we can think about what are all the other variables. But thank you very much. It's a really, really kind of detailed paper and gives us a lot of good information.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Are you happy to respond on that, Mark? And then we'll come to others.
Yeah, that was 3 really good points there. On the last one about learning outcomes, one of the things about triangulation with the ILR is that each learner at the beginning of a course has to state one of 7 purposes for their learning. So we're trying to look at that in relation to the 3 and 4 domains we're using. So they state it, that they want to improve their basic skills, or they want to be more confident, or whatever. So that is one of the things we're looking at. The other thing we're looking at in terms of learning outcomes are providers' processes for measuring learning outcomes, either through qualifications or a process that most providers use, if not all, called RAPA, which stands for Recognizing and Recording Progress and Achievement in Non-Accredited Learning, which has been around since 2001 and is accepted by Ofsted. So the learning outcome, rather than the wider outcome, is covered off by that aspect. In terms of the first point you make, which is a really important one, on the London Learner Survey, for example, they look at a learner's position at the beginning and the end of a course. And so it's not an improvement statement, it's 2 static states, and then you judge whether someone's improved or not. That's quite an expensive approach. We've gone down the other approach, which is used in a lot of surveys, these 60 questions we analyze, where people make a statement about, since doing the course, has something improved or got worse, generally improved, in relation to the course. Because of course, one's health could deteriorate and have nothing to do with the course at all. And although those questions are tried and tested, when we've spoken to providers, we've changed them quite a bit, because providers have told us that we could get some unexpected outcomes from using the questions. So to answer your question, that is still a work in progress about the wording of those questions. But you're absolutely right. It's essential we get them right.
Thank you. Really helpful, Lara.
I can see from your work that we will end up with robust feedback and KPIs from learners and from providers. How do we obtain the same level of detail from employers. So we know employers will know what their thematic, difficult to fill roles are. How do we know that we've addressed what they need to see in training between the start and end of when we're measuring? Or have I missed something in previous meetings?
Do you want to respond, Mark? Anyway, sorry, Mark, I'll come to you first.
I think that might be one for the Andrea or Jackie to respond to.
Yeah, I think we're doing employer surveys in the future around the whole of adult learning. The work that we're piloting at the moment is around tailored learning, which is community learning, which is helping people who are furthest away from employment. And a lot of the work will be, so do you need me to turn this on?
It is on,
Yeah.
it is on.
Okay.
It's fine.
So a lot of the work that is undertaken in these courses is to help engage people into learning. Going forward, we're thinking about implementing this across the piece. And I know Andrea's working on our commissioning strategy and our work with employers. So that's a kind of question for the next phase, really. It's a really important point, and I think it's something we need to think about in terms of serving employers. Might be something for the working group in terms of how we get feedback from employers about the whole in terms of impact.
And I think my instinct on this would be that that's not quite what this piece of work is for. And it's important to do this piece of work really well and not try and make it do everything. That's probably something that gets picked up somewhere else. Is that? Yeah. Thank you. I don't see any further questions. I have one question which I suspect probably is in the papers but is not in my head right at this moment, which is at what point are we expecting the next piece of feedback on this? And
we're hoping to provide the first report. There's 2 reports due this academic year, so we'll look at the first report, make any tweaks, and perhaps report at the end of the academic year on the analysis, because I think that's going to be the important meaty bit that you'll be all really interested in, and that'll help us then to think, right, what's next.
Lovely. So the next time that comes back to this committee will probably be in the summer.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for the report and really interesting progress so far. So we will look forward to the next stage in the summer. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
And again, that was to note, and we have noted it, and it's really interesting. Item 5 on the agenda is the Youth Forum for the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer, which is Andrea and Eva. Hooray, welcome Eva. Eva, I think this might be your first time at this committee's presenting to the committee, is that correct?
It is my first time, so good morning everyone. Lovely
Welcome.
to meet anyone who I've
Very
met
nice
before.
that you.
Thank you so much, Chair. So thank you so much, everybody. It was lovely to hear some of the energy and interest that's already in this room around the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer and this opportunity to work with a cohort of learners aged 18 to 21 who have been overlooked previously, and as has been recognised, there's lots of challenges unique to the age group who have been through the majority of their educational experience throughout the COVID pandemic, and that's resulted in lots of loss of opportunity. But also there are some unique possibilities that sit alongside this age group where people are accessing information from different sources and exist in different communities and spaces. So the idea of a youth forum to inform the development of the Youth Guarantee really taps into that unique lived experience that this age group has. So asking questions as set out in the paper, which I hope everyone's had a chance to look through, about where are people accessing information, what spaces are they spending time in, what are the barriers they've experienced to learning and work, what worries do they have, to really get an insight from lived experience directly. And presenting this in a forum format taps into some of the brilliant youth voice infrastructure that we already have in our region. There are youth councils that sit alongside some of our parish councils and our constituent local authorities. And there are also various different input panels within partners like the NHS and the way that DWP colleagues function locally. So there are lots of brilliant young people who are already used to sharing their insights and experience with decision makers who we'd really like to have involved in the development of this programme. So I am happy to take any questions about the proposed timeline or delivery of this, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Edgar? Charlotte, and then Alice.
As Andrea knows, I think that this is a particularly exciting piece of work, and I think it's critical to our region's future because the opportunities that we've got to unlock and enable the generation coming through will live with us, of course, for generations. Is it appropriate? Is there a plan to potentially feed this forum into the Employment and Skills Board at all? Because we are actively looking at that membership, and it would be really interesting, I think, to make sure that we've got that that voice feeding through.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy to defer to Andrew on this one as well, but I think yeah, this is exploring the impact that involving more youth voice and young people's experiences in this programme in particular could iterate in future.
Thank you. And just to add to that, yeah, I mean, I think the Youth Guarantee gives us a real driver to get going and get it established, but the vision would definitely be to be able to work with groups of young people more whenever there is scope to co-produce, you know, a policy or a scheme where young people are involved. I think I'm a massive advocate of that. So we would look to use the group for those purposes as well.
Great, thank you. Alice.
Thank you. This sounds like an incredible piece of work and something that I'm really glad to see it links in with the other youth infrastructure that is there. And I know that the city and county have done a recent youth forum, and I think that's gone really well. So I'm glad that this is linking in with that. My question was around the delivery timeline. I know that it's quite a short timeline that you're having to work to, but particularly around the kind of groups of young people that you're trying to be reaching. The only thing that concerned me was that you've only got about 2 weeks for applications to go in, and making sure that we are reaching the people who might take a bit longer to respond or might need a bit of extra help to get that application in, and whether we can make sure that the applications is kind of simple as possible, so that if people do want to express an interest, they're not kind of yeah, on the back foot already because of that time. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you for that question. And I think, as you recognise, we are working in a short timeline and hoping to get this off the ground as quickly as possible so young people can be involved from the outset. We've had some initial conversations with partners in the youth sector locally. So, as you say, it's a combination of making sure that application process is as simple and unthreatening as possible, and also working with the youth workers in our communities who already have close relationships with those young people to encourage them to apply. So thank you for putting that on the radar again, and hopefully it will be simple and streamlined and get young people involved without too much hassle, to make sure it doesn't scare anyone off who's new to this kind of work.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if there's any way that people who aren't already involved with a youth organisation could become aware of this. How are you informing people that you're looking for candidates?
Thank you for that. Yeah, obviously the reach of youth work, whilst wide in the county, doesn't necessarily reach everybody. The plans for recruiting to this forum will be a balance of working with young people who are involved in existing provision, but also working with colleagues through partners like the job centres and youth organisations who work with young people who aren't there for the purpose of youth voice. They're there to be supported in another sense, whether they've already been identified as at risk of NEET, or, for example, I spoke recently with an organisation who works with young parents, and that's identified as a key factor that can affect people's early experiences of training and employment. So because of the timelines of this, we're hoping to use the networks that exist to reach young people rather than put it out to an open application in the first instance. But it definitely won't be a case of working with young people uniquely who are already highly engaged and involved in Youth Voice. We'll also be working with youth workers to involve young people in this process who maybe aren't used to having their voices heard, and trying to give them the skills and confidence through this process to become more involved and encourage their peers to get more involved in future. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. I guess just a comment rather than a question, but as you go through, it's a massive piece of work and it's really, really exciting. If there's any support that you need in terms of kind of employer standpoint, please do reach out. I'm going to speak on behalf of Charlotte as well, but you absolutely have our support on that. And I think a bit more specifically on the employer sort of board standpoint, it's a massive challenge for employers getting their head around the pace of change and the speed with which new generations are coming through and how different they are to like the traditional workforce. Again, speaking as a manufacturer, pretty stark challenge in my sector particularly. And I know there are organisations out there that are doing things like we've been working with Inspire to Ignite on a young person ready thing to try and help employers. I think we need to start getting our head around kind of now how we can be geared up to make sure that we do something really targeted and really kind of swift to back up what you guys are finding out in the youth forum. So please do stick close to us.
100%. I think there's a anonymous reference in the report to not reinventing the wheel when it comes to working with employers to explore what a young person ready environment looks like, because a lot of that work is already being done both nationally and uniquely in our county. So thank you for pointing that out. And I think it's going to be a combination of understanding, striking the balance between what employers need a workplace to be and not entirely having to pivot around the experience of young people, because it is a journey to evolve to be work ready, but making sure that it's not unnecessarily exclusive to young workers. So thank you.
Yeah, well, this is fantastic. Really, really glad to see this. There's a real potential here. We've got the experts in terms of how we support young people, are those young people. And there's a real sense here that this means that we'll be working with rather than doing to our young people, and I think that's absolutely essential. And I really like the tone of what we're saying, which is not patronising at all, and it is really respecting the fact that we're going to have people here with a huge amount of insight and respecting the voice they'll bring. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points, partly what Councillor Gilderdale raised around ensuring that we can get a range of voices into this. I wonder if part of that, if we are inviting applications, is that we don't simply look at a written form, that we allow people to have a range of ways to express an interest, because not everybody who has got something to say will necessarily be happy in writing kind of 2, 3, 4 page application forms, and may prefer to do that with a video or audio or have a conversation. I think it sounds like this is what we are doing, but I think it's really key that we're looking at individuals that are going to bring the most insight, rather than simply having these schools are in the kind of places that we want to target, and therefore someone from those schools, because you won't necessarily get those hard to reach young people coming through from that. It sounds like we're absolutely onto that though. The other thing, just in terms of thinking about hard to reach, I'm sure that we've got this in mind. Care leavers are going to be absolutely critical here. So I know, for example, that Peterborough has a care leavers forum. That might be a great place to talk to the young people and see if there's some people there that would like to come forward. They're not mentioned. I assume it's part of your list. Citizens UK have been doing some absolutely phenomenal work in giving young people a voice, and it will be great to ensure that they're involved in that. The only other thing I would raise is, and I think hopefully that as we're working with other organisations, we will avoid this, is sometimes when you talk to community organisations, they say they have so many invitations to have somebody stepping forward as a representative. and that often their members can feel rather overloaded by the large number of requests. So if there's any way that we're able to kind of synergize this with other organisations so that we're not putting too much pressure on a young person to say the same thing in 5 different places. So if there's any joined up work we're able to do once this is in place, for example, are we also talking to other services if they're wanting to hear voices too? Can we find a mechanism that those voices can all be heard in one place? I think that's really important. But thank you. I'm so excited by this. Thank you so much.
For that, that's really helpful feedback, and absolutely Citizens UK and their youth assembly were well aware of that, and there's been some really useful and contextual recommendations out of that which we can hope to build in, and definitely being respectful of the young people's time who have chosen to come forward and trying to streamline the asks of them as much as possible. That's all acknowledged, so thank you.
I agree with Councillor Smith's final comment there. Having observed youth work you've listed a lot of great organizations here that are already doing work with people. And when a young person volunteers their time unpaid to help one of those organizations, they tend to get pounced upon by lots of other organizations saying, oh, here's someone who's confident and willing. And then not only do they feel overwhelmed, but we limit the variety of stakeholders that we're consulting. So I'm glad that you've thought about that already. My question is about the terms of reference. So this committee is being asked to approve the terms of reference. It seems to me that I would prefer that the young people who become involved actually decide what their terms of reference are. Have we thought about that at all, giving them the agency to decide what the purpose of their group is?
Might have to defer that one again, but absolutely, I think making sure the actual running of the board is as youth-led as possible would be fantastic. It's specified that one of the items on their first meeting will be to elect their own chair and discuss the running of meetings and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'll pass on the question about the terms of reference, but that's something I think we should consider.
So just to say, I think the terms of reference that we've provided would be a starter for 10 for them. And then obviously we would want the young people to shape that moving forward. So I think it's a starting point. What we've proposed gives them something tangible to understand why we've called them together. And then they can shape and refine that as they go through.
Yep. I think Andrea's probably covered it off, but I was just wondering if we could say something, because I absolutely agree about the young people shaping this. Could we say something like, with the below terms of reference, subject to refinement by the Young People's Committee, or something like that?
I'm sure we can find that and make it clear to them that when they have formed themselves, they are absolutely welcome to make comments and potentially changes to their terms of reference. Good. I have only heard enthusiasm for this project so far. Thank you very much indeed, Eva. We do need to vote on this one, so I'm happy to propose it. Can I have a seconder for it, please, from somewhere? Thank you, Anna. That's great. And if all those in favour of this, if you could indicate now, then we can pass that. That looks unanimous. Brilliant. Thank you all very much. And thank you very much, Eva. We will look forward to hearing updates on how this is going, and with a bit of luck, meeting our youth forum and the new chair. Thank you. That's great. Good. Item 9 on the agenda is the further education cold spots. And in case there is anybody watching who wasn't aware, we have already had a bit of discussion about this prior to the meeting and pre-briefing. So if this is brief, that will be one. Andrea.
You. Okay, so the paper sets out the progress to date around the FE cold spots. So I think members can remember back in October we had an update, and an agreement was made that we would proceed with establishing a process that would enable us to get some expressions of interest from the sector in terms of how we could address the cold spots, and to hopefully move forward with a plan in terms of getting the FE capital money that we secured spent to address those needs. So the paper just informs members of an update in that an expression of interest phase was held during December. They've been assessed and feedback has been given to the applicants who put expressions of interest in, and we are hoping to open an application window for applicants to proceed with their full application, which will be assessed through an open and transparent process. So we've established a grant funding route for this rather than procurement, and the recommendations to the committee are such that we have the right approvals in place to spend that money and to get moving on it, and to ensure that I've got the appropriate delegations as Assistant Director to enter into grant funding agreements with providers on behalf of the combined authority. So I'll hand back to Councillor Nasinger to cover that off. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Katie, sorry. You probably should have, I think it was, yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Any other questions or comments on this? Laura?
So this is a capital scheme. Can you give us an example of something that is eligible and something that is not eligible? Because I think that's often a difficulty in understanding a revenue versus a capital grant.
So I think the best way to look at it, and the way I've always looked at it, is if you took a building and turned it upside down and shook it, it's things that come out of the building. So it would be capital assets, furniture, kit, equipment, technical equipment. We have said we'll fund software. We would fund rent, leases, building costs. So anything that would become a capital asset would be covered by this. What wouldn't be covered would be the revenue costs of the learning that then took place in those environments, salary costs of teachers or managers or anything like that. So it is purely a capital project, and we've made it clear that the future learning that would take place that would use the capital assets, that would have to be funded through existing adult skills funding or post-16 funding that the provider would have access to. And what we have said is that we would look for a return on investment, and we track and monitor that for 3 years after the capital investment has been made. So the committee will be able to learn and understand what the return on investment was in terms of how many people have been able to access learning as a result of the capital investment.
Excellent question. Anna.
Thank you. So one of my questions was going to be how do we ensure that the money is being used for the reasons that we had allocated it? So I'm really glad to hear you said 3 years of tracking after that. I guess the question might be, if I was a provider, well, this is great, there's capital funding. What support might I get to ensure that there is revenue funding that goes alongside that? Are we offering some support that would help them to find that revenue funding?
This programme hasn't been in a position to offer that revenue funding, but what we are doing is working with the providers to identify other routes of funding that they've got access to, and in the main, we will, you know, if we come across a situation where that is a complete barrier to the success of a programme, then we'll consider what options are available to us. But in the main, we have asked providers to identify the revenue.
Follow up on that to say, Anna, that when we kind of, this has been quite a long process in getting to this point. And I think when we asked for expressions of interest from providers, it wasn't entirely clear how many people would come forward with good ideas for this capital funding. Actually, there have been loads, which has been really encouraging and really reassuring that actually providers are out there who have excellent ideas about how what is in some respects a relatively small amount of capital funding could be used really effectively to increase access to learning in these areas where that there isn't quite as good access as there is in some other parts of our system. So it's been really encouraging to see the number and the variety of different projects that have come forward for expressions of interest. Yeah, that's a very, very positive outcome of this programme. And I think probably for the Combined Authority looking further forward, one of the things that's come out from the conversations around this is just how short the sector is of capital funding, and how much kind of using this route can help to improve the offer across the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So from that perspective, I think it's been a really good process. So that's helpful.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I'm particularly looking here at page 71 of our pack and seeing where some of the funding's being allocated in it in the broader terms. And it looks a really exciting project. Huge amount of work's gone into this, so thank you.
Good. I don't see any further questions on this, and we did have quite a good discussion about this before the meeting in closed session. So I'm not very surprised by that. This is so the first recommendation here we don't need to vote on, but we do need to vote on recommendations B and C. So I'm happy to propose those. Can I have a seconder from somewhere? Thank you, Eileen. And all those in favour of the recommendations, if you could indicate now, would be wonderful. Again, I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I'll invite Katie back in. Katie has a conflict of interest, potentially, probably doesn't actually, but anyway, it's always better to be careful. Good. Let's move on to item 10, which is the Adult Skills Commissioning Strategy, which is also Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you. Real pleasure to bring you this paper again, following on from previous committee in October, where we informed the committee of our intentions to publish a revised commissioning strategy in terms of how the Combined Authority approaches commissioning of the Adult Skills Fund and Free Courses for Jobs Fund. And at that point, we committed to going away and working with our providers to co-produce a strategy that made sense, was clear, was transparent, and enable people to be very clear in terms of our strategic intentions around future commissioning linked to these particular funds. The proposed strategy is attached and has been shared with you, and it sets out our intent to continue to operate a dual commissioning approach to adult skills funding, so that we'll continue to have a number of grant funded providers who we work with, and the intention there is to ensure that we don't destabilise the big FE colleges and training providers and local authorities who've been very used to this way of working over a number of years, and prior to devolution had direct grants from the Department for Education. So it's really worth noting that. So that approach gives a level of consistency to that, and to also continue to procure independent training providers under contracts for services, which again is a method we've used in the past. But what we have been able to do since previous committee was work with Crown Commercial Services to establish a dynamic purchasing system, which makes the process of procurement a little bit more straightforward for providers, in that they can register on this system and be ready to then react to any calls to tender. So we've made progress with that, and we're at a stage where hopefully following this committee and board approval, we'll be able to open the procurement to get those training providers on board. We are seeking recommendation approval from the committee to enter into 3-year contracts and grants. And again, that's to offer a level of sustainability in terms of what can be developed and delivered over time, and it will reduce the level of administration that the Combined Authority has to go through in terms of procurement and commissioning if we're able to provide contracts for that length of time. And finally, the paper obviously seeks delegation for us to enter into those funding agreements. But hopefully the commissioning strategy sets out and will have a golden thread with a lot of what we've spoken about today in terms of the wider outcomes that we're seeking to achieve through the commissioning of adult skills. This commissioning strategy will be one of 3 documents that we'll go forward to publish. The other 2 being a strategic skills plan, which goes hand in hand with local skills improvement plans, which talks more about the wider skills needs that are needed across the region. So local skills improvement plans are very much focused on post-16 technical education, whereas the strategic skills plan will focus on a bit more detail around what the wider outcomes framework is telling us about our residents, what we know about the economic inactivity and unemployment levels, and it will talk about a more holistic approach to skills, which we haven't done since we published the employment and skills strategy back in 2021, I think. So that will be something we work on. That will also contribute to the local growth plan. And the other document that we will publish is an assurance framework, which sets out how we work with our commissioned providers to ensure high quality of education is being delivered to our residents across the board, and how we deal with any overall underperformance in year. So this brings a very coherent approach to commissioning, and one that providers have shared with us feels much more transparent and clear to them. So I'd really welcome any questions you have on this, and would seek your approval when those points are made. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen.
It's not really a question, it's just a comment. I'm really pleased to see that there's going to be a bit more focus on community learning, because I know that there was a period during which there was less focus on that and more focus on qualifications. And I felt like something had been lost, especially in South Cambs, where village colleges were sort of like lifelong learning. And it was quite important that people could go along to courses which gave them more confidence, which might not give them skills for doing a particular job, but it was the confidence that they got, which could then lead on to them gaining more skills to get a job. So I'm really pleased to see that is coming back into focus. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's been a really clear recognition about the importance of going out into communities and offering things where people are, rather than always expecting them to come. Laura.
Thank you. In section 3.4, you talk about there being flexibility within the funding to enable providers to use it for learning support, childcare costs, and hardship payments. 3 really important barriers that we can help learners overcome. So I'm thinking about, our rural residents who can't afford the Tiger bus, or the young parents who need a bit to top up their hours in preschool. At what level is that flexibility going to be? Is this something that would have to be included in the bid for the provider, that they're going to use part of their fund for that? Or we're going to assume that a percentage of what we're giving out will be used for those things? How does that flexibility work in reality?
So that flexibility is one that we give wholly to the provider. We work with them to obviously understand what their local policy is around that. But if they understand that they've got a much greater need to spend much more of their funding on hardship payments or childcare costs, then we will trust them to use their funding appropriately and channel it into the right ways. Providers have to report back on the individual learner record how much funding has been spent on learner support, and that gives us a very clear picture of what percentage overall of the fund is being used for those things. That's not something we've monitored before, but we will going forward, because it will enable us to understand the needs of learners much more. But it is something that we do enable our providers to make decisions on locally.
Thank you. Again, I don't see any further questions, and I think we're very supportive of all the work that's being done on this. It's very, very important part of what we do. So again, I'm happy to propose, and I think if we take all the recommendations A to E together, could I have a seconder again? Thank you, Eileen. That's very kind. All those in favour, if you could indicate now, please. Thank you. I think that's unanimous again. And now item 11, I think our final major one, which is the work programme. Sorry. That's I'm not sure whether does anybody have any comments or things that they want to say about the work programme? I don't see any. So thank you all very much. I think that's the end for this meeting. The next meeting is on the 24th of February, which I have a feeling will come round extremely quickly. Thank you all very much for your time this morning. It's been a very good and positive meeting, as it often is, and lots of really encouraging stuff, particularly around the coal spots work, which is very exciting. Thank you. We'll close the meeting there, and thank everybody for their time.